here. I don't know if you noticed this. My battery ticker is going way, way down. I brought the wrong cord. So if we go out, we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. So thank you for having me. It's good to be in Kalamazoo. I've been here once, but it was dark. So I don't know where I am relative to anything else. But it is really, really good to be here. So thank you for having me. So just to kick off, one thing Lumina doesn't fund, we only don't fund a couple things, and one of those is scholarships. And another thing we're not particularly interested in, though of course we're advocating for affordability, is free college. However, we want to ensure that post-secondary credentials are affordable, number one, but we're really, really interested in ensuring that communities are organizing around higher education as a goal, and that they understand the impact that a well-educated populace can have on their quality of life and competitiveness. And that is why I think I'm here. I want to thank Janice right there and Chuck Wilbur particularly for bringing me here and for becoming very, very good friends over the last several years. I've had the opportunity to work with both of them as well as with Salim and Sean and Alice from El Dorado through Lumina's Convening Strategy, which I'm privileged to lead as well, trying to get the word out about the promise. And I'm pretty convinced that our work together helped lay the foundation for the community work that I'm able to lead now. And I owe you not only professional kudos for the amazing work that you do, but I owe you personal ones as well, because this is pretty much a dream job. Not a whole lot wrong about what we're doing here. So if we're going to beat you over the head with Goal 2025, just FYI. Lumina Foundation, as you know, is the largest private foundation in the nation focused solely on increasing post-secondary access and success, especially for those people that we've not served very well with post-secondary education in the past. This is Goal 2025. We work nationally, now we get to work locally. It's our goal to reach this goal. And now, because I'm a big nerd, and I really can't help myself, I'm going to tell you why Goal 2025 is so important, and I'm hopefully going to convince you that this is the thing that you should devote your entire lives to. All right, so nothing like being ambitious. All right, and truthfully, I can't stand standing still, and so if I'm moving around a lot, that's why. Here's how we think we get to the goal, folks. We know it's not just one thing. You guys can implement all of the Promise programs that you want. If we sent every kid, graduated 100% of every 18-year-old in this country, sent 100% of them to college, 100% of them graduate from college with some sort of credential, we would still not meet Goal 2025. The numbers are not there. All right? So this has got to be a multifold, multifaceted strategy. Here's how we think we can start getting there. All right, we know right now that we're on track to produce short of about 23 million degrees between now and 2025. There are a number of reasons why we're not producing those degrees. The first, we've got quite low high school graduation rates, as well as, I'm going to turn this around so I can see it, as well as college participation rates. If we just increase those to the rates of the top performing states, not to 100%, we can expect an additional 3.6 million post-secondary credentials produced. If we increase the college completion rates to the rates of the top performing states, not 100%, nowhere near 100%, which should be our goal, by the way, we can expect 5.3 million degrees. If we increase the number of adults who are going to school for the first time by just 3.5%, there's 1.5 million. If we get any percentage, right here it says 10%, of the 36 million people in this country who started college but didn't finish, as a result of those low post-secondary completion rates, we can expect 3.6 million more degrees. And finally, when we finally get it together and start counting certificates, we can expect an additional 10 million degrees produced. So that's how we think we get to the goal. And this should shock you, right? This is the one that moves me to get all hot and flustered and indignant, right? We've done a damn good job so far at educating white, wealthy people. In fact, in 1970, 40% of the young people from the top income quartile had a bachelor's degree. We doubled that to 80% by 2010. Meanwhile, we almost doubled the rate of young people from the lowest income quartile over that same time, from 7% to 11% holding a bachelor's degree by the time they're 24. What this means is that every attainment gain that we've made over the last 40 years has been among wealthy individuals. Not fair. This is no way to build a democratic society. This just continues to shock me, even though I've showed it probably 1,000 times. If you get jazzed up by saying we're number one, here's another thing that we need to tell you. We're not number one, we're number 4 among developed countries in this world. We're at about 42% thereabouts. We rank 4th, even though we're quite higher than the OECD national average. What I have to tell you here, the slide wouldn't work, is that there have been any number of communities who've expanded between generations their attainment rates, meaning our American dream, I hope you agree with me, is that the young people we're bringing up have more opportunity, more success, more happiness than we do, right? I think that's why you're investing in the Promise. Somewhere along the line, the United States decided that about 40% was right, and for the first time, our youngest generation of people, our 25 to 34-year-olds, are under-attaining our eldest generation of workers. That should, I think, startle you for a number of reasons, not only because that older generation of workers is the largest generation of workers, and they will be retiring, vacating jobs where we don't have people to fill. Further, a lot of folks say, well, anybody can increase post-secondary attainment rates. What about what they learn? Well, I'll tell you one thing. South Korea increased its post-secondary attainment rate by 5 percentage points last year. Last year. The more important thing is that they had corresponding gains of numeracy and literacy. They are learning skills. The knowledge is being built with these post-secondary credentials. And this is what happens in the general economy. Michigan, among the hardest hit in the nation by the downturn. Indiana's the same boat, right? What happened during the recession was that those without a post-secondary credential, those who stopped at high school or worse, below, lost essentially every job that was lost during the recession. Those with bachelor's degrees or above gained jobs during the recession. So the meme that you hear over and over again is college worth it, is college worth it? Hey, what about that PhD cab driver? Statistically, not true. Really fun to talk about in the media. But if you look at this, the brunt of this recession was borne by those who are least able to compete within it. Every job that has been gained since the recession ended, so-called, has been with those with post-secondary education, while those with a high school degree or less have continued to lose jobs. Right? This is startling. What this means is that it's a different story now. The jobs that were available for folks 30 years ago, that we keep thinking are going to come back one day, the mining jobs or the production jobs or those kinds of things where you can get a high school diploma and go work on the line for 40 grand a year with a pension, do not exist anymore. This is just where the rubber hits the road for individuals. It doesn't matter so much what the rates are here, although of course we all know that those with the post-secondary credential earn more than those without. What this shows is that the value that's being placed on credentials by employers is growing and growing and growing. The tails are spreading, right? This also means that we're underproducing. So a lot of folks say, well, 60%, that's, arbitrary, or who cares about that? What this really means is that we're underproducing folks with post-secondary credentials. Because if we had enough of them, the premium would stop growing, if you believe in economics. I do. All right. So we think that the road to 2025 runs through our cities, and that's why we're making major investments in cities, to help you define, help you achieve your goals through coordinated action. We know that about 66% of the population of this country is based in the top 100 metro areas. And we also know that about 75% of our economy is driven through those same 100 cities. Now, this doesn't mean you got to be a big city to do this work, because it's going to take everybody, literally everybody. And if you're from a small town like I am, you know the town's going to live and die based on education. If it's not the K-12 school, it's going to be the capacity to attract teachers, the capacity to attract doctors, lawyers, accountants, all those people you need to make a town run. So this, just dropping knowledge bombs, okay? We call them 21st century students because we know that about 75% of the students are actually what we would call, in higher education terms, non-traditional. And I figure when you get to 75%, you cease being non-traditional and you start being quite traditional, right? You are the norm now if you're working, if you have a family, if you're low income, if you're first generation, if you're a minority student, if you're going part-time. All of these factors that have been called risk factors are now the norm. They're the norm now. Only about 25% of the people we send to school anymore are middle, upper income, white, second, third, fourth generation college students who get to go full-time to a residential campus. I told you before, 36 million Americans have got some college and no degree. That should startle you. That means there's 36 million Americans right now who, for whatever reason, didn't finish. And we know that about a third of those folks have got the equivalent of an associate degree. We need to find them and get them that credential so they can max out on the potential that credential means. And there are also the chronic attainment gaps that we'll continue to hammer down on until they're gone. And this is where this hits the road. We know as a nation, we are not getting whiter as a nation. By 2040, we will be a minority-majority nation, right? So if your fastest growing populations are showing persistent gaps through, I would argue, very little fault of their own, through systematic disengagement or chronic problems within our communities, we need to do something about it. This is where it happens. And finally, it's not just the economy, and I was very tempted to put stupid on the end of that, right? It's not just the economy, stupid. We know that post-secondary education is not just related to jobs, it's not just related to money, though those are very sexy, fun things to talk about. It's also about our democracy. It's also about our lives as human beings. Our friend Tony Carnevale says, education allows one to live fully in one's time. And we can argue, it's very difficult to live fully in one's time if you're living under a bridge. However, it's about more than just jobs in the economy. It's about life expectancy, insurance coverage. It's about general health, right? It's about marriage. If we're worried about marriage, education is a key contributor to marriage, as well as longevity. Generational attainment. You know that the biggest predictor of a young person's post-secondary attainment is his mother's post-secondary attainment, right? Smoking cessation. Educated folks are less likely to smoke. Voting rates, volunteering, charitable donations, home ownership. If we have any values, I think you will ultimately find that they are correlated very strongly with education. I hope I've made the case. What we have right now, and this is where Lumina's putting its flag in the ground, learning system cannot be, should not be anymore based on courses and seat time. A former colleague of mine used to like to say, if we're focusing on seat time, you're focusing on the wrong end of the student. All right, I got to let it sink in every once in a while. We can't be organized around semesters. Our population does not work in the fields anymore. The vast majority of us do not work in the fields anymore. Therefore, we should take school during summer. We can't rely on proxies for learning, namely 16 weeks in a semester, or a B. What does that mean? Are you competent or are you not? And a one-size-fits-all approach. What a learning system is, and this is where I will then get back into why we are here today. It's outcomes-based. We have transparent and accessible learning outcomes that define learning. We're student-centric. Student-centric, I'm going to tell you that about 15 times today. We're open to acceleration. Who cares? If you know what you're supposed to know by the time, within 2 years instead of 4, you should get your degree. There's no purpose for staying that extra time. And finally, open to innovative and affordable delivery models. So, because I do whatever Janice tells me to do, this is what Janice asked me to talk about. All right. She asked me to talk about what works, K-12 post-secondary partnerships, goal setting for communities, what funders are looking for, what you need to know about your philanthropic community, and then some general musings on the promise. And so 15 slides in, let me actually start my remarks. So just as a note, I almost never script myself because I read faster than I talk. talk faster than I read. It's a mix sometimes. And there's really nothing worse than looking at somebody who's lost your place. I've been there, and I hope I don't do that to you. I did today, though, because I have about 1,000 things that I want to say, and I don't want to forget anything. So here I go. So, what works? And what a question, Janice. I have no idea. But I think there are some frames of mind we can put ourselves in that let us get closer and closer to what works. So what works has to be defined in terms of community organizing and institutional performance, namely process and practice, right? It does you, as your community, absolutely no good to establish partnerships if institutions are not willing to increase enrollment, persistence, and completion, right? And similarly, post-secondary institutions have a vested interest in seeing students being better prepared for college work, but they don't care if you do it via a partnership, right? Especially if you're paying full freight via your promise, right? So what works? And that's whatever works for your community. There are models, and I can tell you definitely there is not a single community that's doing the same thing as any other community. They're not out there implementing the exact same model for the exact same purpose in the exact same way. And that's what I think makes communities so exciting to work in, is the variation and the opportunity for priority setting. So what works is what matters to you. What we know about community collaborations is this, is they need to be led by a neutral party who's willing to serve as chief cat herder. They're rarely led and managed by post-secondary institutions, but the ones that have the biggest impact in those communities have the absolute buy-in and support of those post-secondary institutions. The best collaborations are the ones based on action. Action. Yeah, of course, everybody needs time to hear and be heard, but without action, your collaboration will fall apart. So plan, but then get to work. Create ownership among your partnership, because one person, no matter how strong, charismatic, or persuasive, or stubborn, cannot manage, sustain, and create a partnership. And higher education-driven work specifically, and actually particularly for Promise programs, efforts that are driving toward economic development, community revitalization and transformation, downtown revitalization, et cetera, they have to blend this process and practice that I talked about. So you've all heard about collective impact, of course, because the philanthropic community and everybody else has been banging you over the head with it for quite a while. We're at Lumina very supportive of collective impact efforts, because they represent a structure that appears to have the capacity to organize, delegate, and measure for results. However, organizing, delegating, and measuring have to happen for a reason, and that reason has got to be more than better, right? So because I'm from Lumina, I'm going to repeat. The programs have to be aligned about not just getting students out of high school and off to college, but more importantly, getting students through college. Access without success is a broken promise. I use those words really intentionally. All right. Thank you, sir. So another $64,000 question. K-12 post-secondary partnerships. And this is the big question of our field, because I'm pretty sure we all feel like this, right? The truth is, obviously, K-12 and higher education are integrally linked. They are part of the same dysfunctional family. And K-12 produces the students who are hopefully prepared for higher education, for higher level learning, but colleges produce the teachers who teach the students. So the blame game here is really silly, right? Colleges also define, I'm going to wonk out of you for a bit, they also define what it means to be college ready. And not surprisingly, that definition differs not only from state to state, but from institution to institution, and even between institutions within the same system, right? Within the same university, even, right? While we're on the subject of blame, the idea that K-12 institutions are fully at fault for students not being college ready is a farce. In any given year, in any given state, about 60 to 70% of the students who graduate and go on to community college require remediation. Mainly in math, but in language as well. Students who start in remediation statistically have very little chance of completing their degree, and in fact, most of them will not even complete their first college level course. Most of them will not even complete their first college level course. Yet, we know, because it's happening in a variety of institutions now, that students who test into remediation who are enrolled anyway in the college level course but are given support complete the course at a high level higher than those who tested into the college level course in the first place, right? So how much of this blame game is driven not by the students who we keep on blaming, but by the system? And I would argue quite a bit. You also can't talk about higher education work without going back to that word partnership. And I said before that partnerships have got to be about action, and that should define the relationship between K-12 and post-secondary as well. Our best partnerships come from efforts where the institution, no matter how elite or how open access it is, reimagines its role in the community. Higher education institutions, without exception, are under incredible pressure right now. And the answer to many masters, the financial capital enrollment, and more importantly, there's dramatic structural shifting happening within the field. We're entering an era where it's becoming more and more likely they're not going to be able to grow or glam their way out of this change. So the role of the institution in the community has not just got to be not just as a passive recipient of a percentage of the city's public schools graduates. It's not just to do sponsored projects and economic development research for the city. The institution is literally the only route to attainment. We cannot produce credentials. Lumina cannot. You cannot as a K-12 institution or as a community member, as a community organization. Only the institution is endowed with that capacity to create and grant credentials. So that means that working directly, they need to be intimately invested in your success strategies. That means working directly with K-12 to clearly define readiness standards, and in the event there are shortcomings, working hard to overcoming them. It means that both K-12 and higher education have got to change their lens. This is never about the institution anymore. It's about the students. Every single thing both systems do has to be for the student. Everything you do has got to be for the student. So I said earlier that the reason has got to be more than better, and we fully embrace this idea. Oh, I'm supposed to find another power source, so I'm hopeful that this will keep going. We fully embrace this idea of goal setting, and it's playing out all over the place. So entire efforts like Strive, for example, Strive Together, which I'm sure you've heard of, as well as the Kalamazoo Learning Network right here, are based on the idea that setting goals and benchmarks leads to meeting goals and benchmarks, right? Which makes sense when you really think about it. So Lumina's, the nation's goal is 60%, and that doesn't mean that every community should set a 60% goal, although it might be very appropriate for some. And indeed, there are some communities that have exceeded that 60% goal. The important thing is knowing where you are now. If your community has a 16% attainment rate, it makes very little sense for you to set a 60% goal, not only because it will be incredibly difficult for you to make it, but because there may not be a need for 60% if you're surviving on 16 now. So where are you, and what do you need? Where do you need to be? Take a look at your jobless data. What are your vacant occupations? Where are your growth industries? What are your proportion of adults with some college no degree? How many of your students go into college now? It's better for you to set a goal that is challenging but attainable, aspirational but necessary, than it is for you to match a national imperative. Also, your goal has to be your own. Where can you get traction? But in general, there are several criteria we use to measure a goal's strength, and I hope you consider these. They're measurable, they include a target date, they address gaps in attainment, and they're based on data. Pretty simple, pretty simple. The more important part of goal setting is strategy development. Once you decide that your goal is 40, 60, 80, whatever you decide, you have to do something about it, right? And this means taking a look at your data to determine your priorities. And again, I'm going to wonk out. This is where I live, is in the wonk land, okay? Sorry. You're interested in the promise, so your interest is very likely in the K-12 to higher education pipeline area. So I'm going to put myself in your shoes for a second, and I did a little stream of consciousness and writing down the questions I would start asking, right? I want to operationalize on a goal that contributes to the attainment of 16 to 22-year-olds, and they're my target, right? First, I want to know how many of them are dropping out and when. I want to know how many of them are taking 4 years of high school math. Right? I want to know how many of them are taking the ACT and SAT, regardless of how I feel about those tests personally. I want to know how many are filling out the FAFSA, how many are applying to college, which colleges are they applying to, how many are getting accepted, how many are getting placed into remediation, and what are the patterns for the students who need remediation. Finally, once they get to college, we need to know what happens to them. As I said before, this is not about getting students to college, this is getting students through out of college. So the point is, once the big goal is set, the actual work has to start. So moving on to this funders thing, right? There's a joke that might be funny if it wasn't so true. And that is, if you've met one funder, you've met one funder. And I can't speak for all funders. I can only speak for the one that I have the privilege of working for. But to the extent that we pay attention to each other and work together in the field, there are a couple of broad trends that I'm noticing that I think might be insightful, maybe. It's a crapshoot. First, cities are where it's at right now. Lumina's community strategy is pretty new, and there are a number of foundations that have been doing this for a really long time. But in general, I would say that more foundations and national organizations are looking to cities to organize for change. Whether that's happening because the Washington and federal government's so dysfunctional right now that nothing can happen there, that probably plays into it a little bit. But I think the power that is coming out of cities, because you're so close to your kids, you're so close to your priorities, it's very genuine, that level of mobilization and concern that cities are showing. The second is that foundations have really bought into this idea of collective impact. And again, I think collective impact is good, especially if it's being implemented in a supported environment, like with Strive Together. However, I don't know of a single foundation that's fully interested in just collaboration or just collective impact. It's got to be for something. So like I said earlier, process plus practice. Third, I think many funders are very comfortable with pilot projects, but more and more are expressing desire for more systematic change. We, Lumina, okay, here we go, are looking for investment opportunities, not tests, right? And it's difficult to determine exactly what that changes for you on the receiving end. Other than that, at least from Lumina's perspective, we're looking for champions who determined on their own that they need to organize around the issue of higher education attainment. We're not creating champions. We're investing in chickens, not eggs, so to speak. So funders are looking for cogent, researched ideas coupled with the capacity to implement them, with the will to implement them and the desire to share successes and failures with others. So moving on to your environment, there are national funders, regional funders, and local funders, private, family, community, corporate, conversion foundations, all different kinds. And each of them has a mission or set of missions and a distinct way of doing business. You cannot expect to know everything about every foundation you encounter. But you absolutely must know your local philanthropic scene, and you should know your regional and state philanthropic sector. And by know, what do I mean? I mean, you should know your local foundations individually, personally, and in terms of Michigan. I'm in Michigan. I transplanted. Mission is what I want to say. Know your regional and state foundations generally, though cultivate personal relationships with them if you can. And don't try to fit your work to a foundation's mission, because on the chance that they fund you, you will be diverting yourself from the work that you've determined is the most important. And that is where I think organizations like Brandy's and organizations like mine, we work together wonderfully, not because Brandy's adopted Goal 2025, because we care about the same things. We care about getting students to, through, and out of college, right? That's where it works. Finally, communicate your efforts to the foundations, but avoid the pitch, and don't cold call, and don't hire consultants to cold call for you. Right. And I hesitate to some degree to tell you this, but I'm going to anyway. If you can find a national network that sings to you and helps you reinforce your work, and that adds value without adding complication, you should join it. Organizations like Strive, National League of Cities, Talent Dividend, and others, they're what help organizations like mine find organizations like yours. But I will tell you this, if you don't find any value there, don't stick with it. And I don't sign up for every initiative that comes along either, because you're going to end up doing them all alone. And thankfully, there's a growing thoughtfulness, I think, among philanthropic and national organizations that not every funding or networking opportunity is an actual opportunity, and we all need to be more mindful about what we sign up for, lest it divert us from our real plans. So to wrap up, Janice asked me to sort of muse on the promise and hope, and I've been thinking a lot about this since she asked me, and I think this is like the easiest question in the world, because education is hope. It's about choice and chance and growth and realized potential, and it's about letting kids write their own stories as opposed to having their stories written for them. So education was my hope. I came from little town Roscommon. We didn't have a ton of money, but I grew up in a wonderful family, tight, attentive, supportive, loving, and all of those things I wish with all my heart every kid in this nation had. The money didn't matter so much because I had my family, but without the really great preparation I received in high school and by a single teacher named Chris Young, who was actually educated right here at Western, without the life-changing experience of college, which didn't teach me about leaving home, but taught me that there was more to life than home, more to life than Michigan, becoming a well-rounded, hardworking, skilled person would do more for me than money or privilege ever could, right? That's what I think education is all about. Work ethic, talent, knowledge, skills, understanding your place in the world that's ever more complex, right? Where do you find yourself? Education is the way to find yourself. And so your understanding, even if you're at the early stage, that education can transform communities. You're taking this irrefutable fact that without education, without a good core at the center of a city, prosperity will be lost. You're taking this fact and turning it to your advantage. You're spurring schools into action. You're incenting families to stay and move in. You're incenting businesses to locate, all because people care about their kids first and because they care about quality of place. Investing in people is out of vogue. And I don't know how we can, as a country, go to bed knowing that there are kids hungry. And I don't know how we can cut public education, increase funding for corrections, and not see the irony in that. But I think what you're doing is some of the purest kind of support that we can find. You're investing in kids and families. And that I did this last year, too, in Pittsburgh. I'm not a weepy person, but here I am. The choices that we denigrate, like not going to college, dropping out of college, are far more complicated than a lot of people understand. But with your Promise efforts, and even if if your community doesn't do the actual promise, you're putting a flag in the ground and yelling from the rooftops that education matters, that kids matter, that families matter, and that people matter. People matter. And so that is just about the most hopeful thing that I can imagine. And that is all. So thank you very much for your attention. And now I got to have a drink of water.